It began with a whisper, the kind that slithers through palace corridors and clings to the priceless tapestries like a persistent draft. A whisper about money? Naturally. Royal money. Not the official kind, the stuff splashed across commemorative coins and tourist trinkets, but the deep, dark, old money, the kind that's been accumulating for centuries, guarded by layers of tradition and trusts so complex they could make a Wall Street titan weep. The whispers centered on Sophie, Duchess of Wessex, not a name that usually conjures images of scandal. Sophie, the quiet, dependable one, the former PR executive who married Prince Edward and seemingly vanished into the background, content to tend to her royal duties with a minimum of fuss. But beneath that placid surface, it turns out, lay a woman of formidable intelligence and an even more formidable sense of right and wrong. The story goes that Sophie, tasked with the unenviable job of auditing the late Queen Elizabeth II's private funds, stumbled upon something unsettling. A transaction buried deep within the labyrinthine accounts that simply didn't add up. A substantial sum diverted to a company called Bonda Property, owned by none other than Edoardo Mozzi, the dashing property developer who had married Princess Beatrice in a scaled-down ceremony during the pandemic. Now, Edoardo wasn't exactly an outsider. He'd integrated himself into royal life with a certain practiced ease, charming the younger generation, and positioning himself as a modernizing force, eager to drag the monarchy kicking and screaming into the 21st century. But this transaction, this seemingly unauthorized transfer of funds, raised a red flag the size of the Tower of London. Sophie, ever the pragmatist, started digging. She consulted her financial advisor, the aptly named Henry Grayson, a man who had served the Queen with unwavering loyalty for decades. His reaction, a vague mutter about temporary directives from higher up, only deepened her suspicions. Higher up in palace parlance meant Charles, or perhaps even Camilla, rumored to be pushing for radical financial reforms. But Sophie wasn't buying it. She'd spent years navigating the treacherous currents of royal life, enduring the snide remarks and thinly veiled contempt from those who considered her a commoner. She'd learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts were screaming that something was rotten in the state of Windsor. The initial investigation was subtle, a quiet request for information, a discreet inquiry into the paper trail. But the more Sophie probed, the more resistance she encountered. Reports were delayed, meetings were canceled, and a subtle campaign began to paint her as an out-of-touch traditionalist resistant to progress. Then came the first shot across the bow, a plain brown envelope delivered anonymously to her private mailbox. Inside, a chilling message. If you knew where the money really went, you would never sleep again. Accompanied by photocopied invoices detailing a transfer of nearly €1 million to a private investment fund in Rome, signed with Edoardo's unmistakable initials. Suddenly, Sophie wasn't just investigating a financial irregularity, she was embroiled in a high-stakes game of palace intrigue, a shadowy battle against an unseen enemy. Someone, somewhere within the royal household, was feeding her information, guiding her towards the truth. But who and why? Was this a disgruntled employee, a burned business partner, or someone with a genuine desire to protect the crown? The stakes were higher than Sophie could have imagined. This wasn't just about money. It was about the integrity of the monarchy itself. And she, the quiet, dependable Duchess of Wessex, was now the only one standing between the crown and a potentially devastating scandal. Armed with the invoices, Sophie moved. No more polite inquiries. This was a full-blown offensive. She bypassed the usual channels, heading straight for Sir Reginald Hargrove, the Queen's former financial guru, a man whose loyalty was legendary and whose office reeked of old money and even older secrets. She laid out the evidence, the numbers stark against the aged oak of his desk. Hargrove, predictably, stonewalled. Every transaction, he insisted, had been cleared at the highest level. Edoardo was merely a temporary proxy facilitating European ventures. It was a dodge, a clumsy attempt to protect someone or something. The whispers started almost immediately. Sophie was labeled overzealous, a troublemaker, a woman who simply didn't understand the complexities of modern finance. The younger royals, once charmed by Edoardo's vision of a streamlined, profitable monarchy, now eyed her with suspicion. Even Beatrice, radiant in her loyalty, stood firmly by her husband, convinced that Sophie was simply trying to undermine their position. Then came the counterattack. An alert flashed on Edoardo's security dashboard. Sophie had accessed top-secret files, restricted to the Finance Council and the king himself. A complaint was drafted, accusing her of breaching security protocols and endangering the royal finances. The language was smooth, but the intent was clear. Discredit Sophie. Silence her investigation. But Sophie had an ace up her sleeve. Another envelope, thicker this time, slid under her door. A USB drive. On it, a recording. Edoardo's voice, unmistakable, haggling with an Italian broker, discussing off-book profit splits, routing funds through shell companies. Each sentence was a nail in his gilded coffin. Someone was feeding her this information. Someone within the palace walls. And now they had delivered the smoking gun. The confrontation was inevitable. A closed-door session in the council chamber at Buckingham Palace. The air was thick with tension, the ancient portraits on the walls seeming to watch with disapproval. Sophie presented her case meticulously, ruthlessly. Charts, figures, dates, a web of deceit woven with royal funds. Edoardo fought back, denying everything, claiming the documents were forged, decontextualized. He turned to the council, his voice ringing with righteous indignation. "This is a smear campaign," he declared, "an attempt to undermine my efforts to modernize the monarchy." And then Beatrice moved. She rose, her face pale, her eyes filled with a pain that cut through the room. She walked to the table and placed an envelope in front of her husband. The contract, the one she had stolen from his desk, the one that bore his signature, not as a proxy, but as the sole beneficiary of the receiving company. The silence was deafening. Edoardo stared at the contract, his face draining of color. He had been unmasked, not by Sophie, but by his own wife. He lashed out, accusing Beatrice of being manipulated, of being deceived, but it was too late. The senior member of the council revealed that an independent investigation had confirmed Sophie's findings. The money was gone, embezzled. Edoardo's world imploded. But what of Beatrice? Was her act courageous, or was it a merciless sacrifice? His roar echoed, pathetic, a wounded animal caught in a trap of its own making. Etiquette lay shattered on the floor alongside his reputation. The council members, faces etched with a mixture of horror and pity, could barely meet Beatrice's gaze. "No one," she said, her voice raw but clear, "has the right to stain this house." It was a pronouncement, a severing, a declaration of war against the part of herself that loved him. The fallout was swift and brutal. Edoardo, stripped of everything, vanished from the royal radar. Criminal charges followed, the trial a grim spectacle of privilege undone. The crown made an example of him, a stark warning that no one, not even those connected by blood or marriage, was above the law. Beatrice, meanwhile, retreated. Some called it exile, others a necessary act of penance. She relinquished her royal duties, seeking refuge in a quiet life with her daughter, far from the palace intrigue and the relentless glare of the media. Was it a noble sacrifice, a princess choosing duty over love? Or was it a self-inflicted wound, a desperate attempt to cauterize the pain of betrayal? And Sophie? She emerged from the scandal stronger than ever. Her reputation, once questioned, was now unassailable. She was the hero, the truth seeker, the woman who had dared to challenge the established order and win. She inherited the oversight authority she had been denied, becoming the de facto guardian of the royal purse. But there was no victory lap, no gloating. Sophie simply went back to work, poring over spreadsheets, scrutinizing transactions, ensuring that nothing like this could ever happen again. She was the Duchess of Discipline, the embodiment of royal rectitude. So, back to Beatrice. Was her act courageous or merciless? The answer, I suspect, is both. Consider the impossible position she was in. A wife, betrayed by her husband, forced to choose between her love for him and her loyalty to her family, to the crown. She could have closed ranks, protected Edoardo, hoped that the scandal would fade away. But that would have been a betrayal of a different kind, a betrayal of the principles she had been raised to uphold. Instead, she chose to sacrifice her own happiness, her own future for the sake of the monarchy. She handed Edoardo over to the wolves, knowing that his destruction would be her own. It was a merciless act, yes, but it was also an act of profound courage. She chose the institution over the individual, the crown over her own heart. That's what princesses do. That's what they're trained to do. They are symbols, figureheads, guardians of a legacy that stretches back centuries. Their personal desires, their personal happiness, are secondary to the needs of the crown. And so Beatrice made her choice. She sacrificed Edoardo, and in doing so, she sacrificed a part of herself. But she saved the monarchy, and that, in the end, was all that mattered.